Hi, Tom Cunliffe here. This is my monthly podcast from Sailing Today and Yachts and Yachting. This one's from April. Unless they're being peppered with rockets fired by maniacs, we don't generally read much about shipping in the papers. The exceptions come when things have not gone well. Not so long ago, a container ship outward bound from Southampton grounded spectacularly in the Solent and remained lying on her bilge for several days. The crew were taken off, and realising that there was now no danger to life, every yacht sailor on the coast thoroughly enjoyed the video footage and the purple descriptions in the national press about the stricken vessel. It turned out that she'd developed a dangerous list and that the pilot and captain put her ashore on the Bramble Bank rather than risk her capsizing in deep water. As strandings go, this one was unusual. More typically, they result from good old human error. Commander Bill Anderson, RN retired, my ex-boss in the yachtmaster examining trade and a man who knows more than most about such matters, once observed that when any ship comes to a grinding halt, the navigator usually hasn't a clue what's happening because he's maintained his plot and knows exactly where he is. Or he thinks he does. Bill illustrated the remark by referring to a lamentable incident involving one of Her Majesty's destroyers. In those days of traditional non-electronic navigation, pilotage errors were generally rooted either in sloppy dead reckoning or in what Napoleon described as making pictures. Boney, of course, was referring to generals who lost battles rather than ships' captains who found themselves on the rocks. The human condition being what it is, however, the results are the same. Making pictures is all about setting aside inconvenient evidence while preferring to massage reality to fit what you hope is going to happen. I can't speak for the military, but in the navigator's case, it's choosing to ignore shore features or buoyage that refuses to line up with what the chart says. Before GPS, this sort of thing was common. I well recall running down onto the north coast of Spain after crossing Biscay in the days before I discovered Astro. We'd been guided by dead reckoning, plus a bit of help from the old console radio beacon at Lugo, but we'd been held back by headwinds for days, and we really didn't have much idea of where we were. The black and white fathoms charts we used then had drawings in the margins to discourage skippers from making things fit. These were delightful works of art featuring 18th century sailing craft, and they really did help, but we still couldn't be sure. It was only when the mighty Tower of Hercules flashed up outside Corunna that we saw we'd been wrong all along and were grateful we had not rushed in. I once had a yachtmaster candidate whose task was to take me into Chichester Harbour. By punching the wrong numbers into his GPS, he sailed into neighbouring Langstone instead. Chichester Harbour's well buoyed, Langstone less amply supplied. When I asked him where he thought the charted buoys might be as we sailed into nowhere land, he was determined to make pictures. His reply was that they must all have been taken up for maintenance. Like the destroyer captain, he still fancied he knew where he was as he came to an unscheduled halt. The universal downside of running aground under the mistaken impression that you are in deep water is that because you have no control over the grounding, the right action to take may be far from obvious. If, on the other hand, you slide to a standstill on the mud at the end of a tack while beating up a river, you'll have anticipated this possibility and ought to have a contingency plan. All should be well working off a weather shore so long as you've swung the yacht's head through the wind by backing the headsail as soon as she touched. But when you pile up on a lee shore, the chances of coming off unassisted are almost non-existent. Should the tide be falling, the immediate future looks grim. This was my portion in my 22-footer back in the dark ages. My engine was literally a non-starter and my wife and I were foolishly tacking up the Beaulieu River in a stiff breeze against a strong ebb. Perhaps inevitably, in our inexperience, we missed stays on the lee side and ended up well and truly pinned onto the beach. Firmly aground, with the water draining out like an unplugged bath, our only chance was to somehow get the tiny yacht's head through the wind so she could heel over and sail off. We thought about it for a few minutes and it was soon clear there was only one thing for it. With centreboard up, as it now was, she drew only 3 feet. I kicked off my wellies and socks, jumped over the side, struggled round to the bow and started shoving. For a few agonised moments nothing happened. while the sails continued to thrash in the rising breeze. Then, following a massive effort, she suddenly moved. The jib backed and took over my efforts to swing her round to face the river. Now, beam onto the wind, the mainsail filled. She heeled over and away she went, like a little rocket, with me hanging onto the main horse for grim death. My wife was now at the helm and with a leading wind was able to steer back downstream and out into the Solent, trailing me astern with my knuckles turning steadily whiter. Back in deep water she came up towards the wind to spill all the air from the sails. As way dropped off, I was able to claw along to a point around amidships. This shifted my relatively huge lateral resistance to where it would do most good, and the boat sat still while I clambered, dripping and chastened, back into the cockpit. We reached over to Cowes in what remained of the daylight and spent the night with 2 metres under us off the Folly Inn. There'd be no more tight quarters stuff in thin water for us until we regained our nerve. Being too slow to tack as the keel touches always leaves you with a problem. Whatever the tide, unless you can fall back on the services of a bow thruster to kick her through, sailing off what is now to all intents and purposes a lee shore will be impossible, since you're unlikely to be as young and foolish as I was when I jumped in to save the day. Drop the sails instead and do your best to motor out astern the way you came in. Reduce your draft by moving bodies to induce a heel, and when all else fails, lay out the kedge or accept assistance gratefully. Always keep a bottle of scotch handy as a present after being pulled off. The general bonhomie engendered can save a fortune in salvage claims. When things seem hopeless, the ultimate solution can be to pass the spinnaker halyard to a friendly motorboat by attaching a long line to its shackle while its fall is made fast on board. You might even manage this using your own dinghy with an outboard. I stood by once while some highly competent guys did it with their hefty rib, oddly enough for me, on the Beaulieu River. A French yacht had got it badly wrong on the bar. She needed a pull-off sharpish and a straight tow didn't work. So they took the halyard and cruised away while Frenchy closed his hatches. When the rib was far enough off, the lads poured on the power. The yacht heeled over so far she'd no option but to come off as they dragged her sideways. This drastic procedure seldom fails given a big enough powerboat. Years ago, I was hard and fast on a coral head with no helpers presenting themselves. I secured the halyard to a distant mangrove root ashore and winched myself down. Another pal succeeded by hanging the halyard onto his kedge and rowing it well out. But whatever dire ends to which you are driven, the tide will always have the last laugh. If it's rising, take your time. When it's falling, remember Nelson, who always encouraged his men to lose not a moment.